So we've talked about Metro Exodus and its exclusivity towards Epic Games Store twice in this channel, and despite me having money available for 4A games to just gobble at, Epic Games Store picks the worst methods of getting my money. See, if you're living outside of the US and you want to buy this game, you need PayPal, which I do have thankfully, but my PayPal payment is denied by Epic Games Store. The next method of payment thankfully works, but that requires me to go into a mini market and ask the cashier to do something that they're not even familiar with because nobody uses this obscure freaking system. It's like if I'm buying a physical copy of the game. It kind of negates the point of it being a digital freaking copy. Yeah, I'm done ranting about the service for now. Let's talk about the actual game itself, and there are so many things to talk about. Welcome to appabendyt's Uncapped. I can't do a Russian accent and I won't try. Today we're going to be talking about Metro Exodus, the sequel to Metro Last Light, one of my favorite first-person shooters of 2013 and a game that you should be playing if you haven't played it yet. Metro Exodus takes place after the events of Metro Last Light. The protagonist Artyom is tired of the infighting inside the Metro, so he goes out into the world to find out if there are actually people who survived the nuclear bomb. During an expedition with his wife Anna, turns out that there are people who survive, and thus Artyom, Anna, and the rest of his mates journey out into the world to figure out what truly happened ever since the nuclear bomb. Before we get to the actual review, I do have sponsors to shout out. You guys, this review wouldn't be possible if it weren't for my subscribers and donators. Thank you so much, guys. If you wish, you can support me through PayPal, Patreon, and many other means. Links down below. Also, huge thanks to Horace May for the pledge on Patreon. You are fantastic. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's get into the review. One of Metro's great strengths is in the writing. It's pretty interesting that video games that are adapted from books usually tend to have good stories, and Metro is no exception. I think it's because books need to have a good story for it to sell, and video games usually don't have to, so why not just adapt the story from a book and turn it into a video game? But then again, Metro Last Light has an entirely original plot, written by the original author as well. Anyway, I love the post-apocalyptic world that Metro tries to build. I love the relationships and the politics that happen between a lot of the people involved within the Metro itself, to the point of creating extremist ideologies. But unfortunately, you don't get to see that much of them here. What you get to see in terms of setting is something that we've already seen explored in many other post-apocalyptic stories. We have the desert area being occupied by bandits and raiders using vehicles like Mad Max. We have the crazy cultist that hates technology and calls you a heretic for doing so. In a lot of ways, Metro Exodus's plot feels like a typical Actually, I take that back. It's pretty much just a typical Fallout plot. We have people from the underground emerging to the surface to find traces of civilization after a nuclear apocalypse, except they're using a train to travel from places to places to figure out if there are people living in the surface. Metro, you are good at being Metro. Your setting is very distinctly Metro, but then you try to be Fallout, then you try to be Mad Max, and unfortunately, you're not too good at either. Another problem that I have with the plot is that for a gritty post-apocalyptic story, it's pretty soft, at least in one playthrough of the game. You can finish the game in two ways: be an absolutely violent human being that just kills everyone on sight, or just sneak around the bush and knock everyone in the head, which is surprisingly pretty easy. I'm playing on normal, by the way, and I just find it amusing that Artyom essentially turns to Saitama. I laughed at how one-man army Artyom can pummel the living crap out of bandits just by running really fast, dodging bullets, and punching the bandits one by one. Anyway, back to my original point, you can finish this game either by killing everyone or mostly not killing everyone. The game becomes a genuinely gritty, depressing, and in some ways realistic story if you chose the former, which will net you the bad ending. But if you're a mostly non-lethal stealth guy like me to get the good ending, well, let's just say that I've seen Disney movies with darker stories. I won't really spoil too much, but Exodus doesn't punish the group enough. While the group is characterized as just normal human beings really, they're able to get through a lot of the problems very smoothly. I feel like the story could punish the characters more. It's lacking edge in a setting where there should be more edge. It's a post-apocalyptic story that is leaning on the idealistic side, which I appreciate, but still, a little bit more edge is also appreciated. And speaking of characters, let's talk about them, because Exodus is really amazing in its characters. I love these characters. They don't feel like a bunch of badasses. They feel like real people with real issues and struggles. They feel like desperate individuals seeking for help in a place where they wouldn't get any. I particularly love the relationship between Artyom, his wife Anna, and his father-in-law and Commander Miller. There are some seriously wholesome and very silly moments in the game that does make it to look like a comedy at times, but I do appreciate the downtime moments in the train where you can get character development and heartwarming stuff. The story doesn't have an edge that I'm looking for. Hell, it doesn't even have enough titties for my liking. Semi-nude Anna but no tits on her? 1 cap out of 5 game, what the hell? But I still enjoyed it because the characters are so lovable and interesting. In fact, the story was one of the primary reasons why I keep playing the game. I want to know what's going on next and what kind of worlds that they would discover. It's a shame that none of them really surprised me because I've played a lot of post-apocalyptic games, but it's still interesting nonetheless. That being said, I do want the epilogue to be a little bit more impactful, but regardless, I love the story. It's engaging, it's fun, it's flawed, sure, but it's good enough to keep myself engaged throughout the game. And now let's talk about the gameplay. The reason why I love Metro so much is because it's a first-person shooter game that has elements of stealth and survival horror, and it's a challenging one at that. The normal difficulty for this game is still challenging enough for you to not just kill the enemies and the mutants, but also to maintain your health, ammunition, radiation, oxygen, etc. It's a post-apocalyptic survival game with elements of stealth and horror with emphasis on narrative storytelling. But Metro's decision to become kind of like Fallout or Far Cry does have its consequences, namely that it's easier to get ammo for weapons, especially with the brand new and ridiculously simplified crafting system. I'm actually surprised that we get the crossbow very late in the game. One would think that crafting something as simple as a bow and arrow would be the first thing that people make to survive in this dark dystopian world. If you want some challenge in this game, I do recommend bumping the difficulty to hard because certain mechanics in the game does make it a little bit easier on normal. Another thing that makes Metro Exodus to become more like Fallout is the semi-open world areas in the game. You do have these areas and you can explore them to your liking, including doing optional objectives and finding gear upgrades. I find this decision to be more open world a little weird for Metro. It makes sense for the story, sure, but it doesn't have the typical features that open world games have, like, say, custom map markers or a vehicle to use to drive around. Okay, sure, you'll have one later, but it's only one vehicle in one particular open world area, and the controls are actually worse than Far Cry's vehicle controls, if that's even possible. I do appreciate the game for not hand-holding me in the open world section. It reminds me a lot of Far Cry 2, and I do think that a lot of the game's survival mechanics are able to blend well with the brand new open world mechanics. But still, I can't help but to feel that the open world parts of the game feels like baby's first Far Cry 2. And I say 2 specifically because Far Cry 2 also tries to have a more realistic exploration mechanics. Also, Artyom cannot swim. This is probably the first time I've played an open world survival game where the player character cannot swim. It makes sense for a guy who stays in Metro for most of his life to not be able to swim, but still, it makes the water areas to be pretty much a death trap, especially with the freaking nopes that are hanging around. Ugh. And of course, we have the crafting mechanics. You cannot be an open world survival game in 2019 without crafting mechanics. To be honest, the crafting mechanics are very basic, bare bones, and not that great actually. It's there to serve the purpose for your character to craft their tools while they're in the wild. The mechanics are simplified beyond belief. You have scraps, chemicals, and those are it. Those two things would somehow allow you to make ammos and weapons and tools. You can also scrap these weapons and tools, but I rarely scrap them, to be honest. I also really hate the weapon degradation system. I think they degrade way too fast and in my opinion cost a little too much for the cleaning. What about the combat? Well, the combat is fine. It's a bit easy against the human enemies, but it is pretty challenging against the mutants, zombies, and the resident nopes of the game, like the spiders, the scorpions. I'm not gonna spoil the nopes for you because they will provide some genuinely scary and creepy moments. It's best for you to experience it yourself and be surprised at the latest creatures or even objects that will tingle your spine. I find the game to be a lot stronger when it's about the survival horror, exploring dark areas with mutant spiders and scorpions lurking lurking around and hounding you at every direction, which just gives the nope, 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 where's my flamethrower vibe, and it was very unpleasant. It's supposed to be unpleasant, so at least it does a good job at creeping me out. Now let's talk about the PC port. I'm playing this game on the PC version using my laptop equipped with a GTX 1050. This is a really demanding game. The visuals of this game are so breathtaking that you actually need a really damn good PC to run this game at 1080p 60fps Ultra. For my 1050 laptop, the game runs fine at 720p high with hairworks disabled and tessellation disabled. It is able to reach 60 FPS on certain areas, but it's never consistent. The frame rate usually hovers around 30 to 40 FPS when you're outside. This is why I called the 1050 cards console tier. You can play demanding AAA games on them, but you have to be tolerant with 30 FPS. If you're desperate to play this game and you can tolerate the console-like 30 FPS experience, you will be able to play this game just fine on a GTX 1050. But if you want that 1080p 60fps Ultra experience, you would need at least a Vega 64 or a 1070 Ti. Overall, Metro Exodus is not perfect, but it is a great first-person shooter. It has a gripping and engaging story with very relatable characters mixed in with post-apocalyptic survival mechanics that are really well implemented. The game is pretty challenging and will test your skills in first-person shooters and survival horror as well. The survival horror elements in particular is brilliant. It ups the nope factor from Metro Last Light, and it will keep you scared, on your toes, and just making you ask for a flamethrower throughout the entire thing. For all of that, Metro Exodus gets 4 caps out of 5. It's a well-crafted game, and I loved it. As for whether or not you should buy this game, well, it depends on your position on Epic Game Store. This game takes me about 14 hours to beat at normal difficulty, so it does pack quite a bit of content for a game that costs $48. If you really want this game, buying it on Epic Game Store is fine, but there's also nothing wrong with just waiting for the Steam version next year. You can still buy this game on a PS4, for example, but if you're outside of the US like me and you try to buy the game on the PS4, it costs $78 for some reason. What the hell, Sony? And if none of those options are appealing to you, well, there's still piracy.